after having settled on a title for this presentation, and the title was Introducing Camilla Williams, I thought, well, that's pretty presumptuous of me. I'm going to Danville, where she was born and where she grew up, and I'm introducing people there to her. That must be crazy. He said, but the more I thought about it, and there was a very good reason why I didn't change the title. You see, I thought I knew Camilla Williams. The more I read about her, the more acutely aware I became that there's so much more to learn about her. So possibly I could introduce you to some aspects of her life and career that would be new to you. And I hope before the afternoon is over, you might tell me some things about her that you know. I've heard the name Camilla Williams all my life. I grew up in Petersburg. My parents were always on Virginia State's campus attending concerts. I talk to my students all the time about her. We want them to know the people who walk the same streets that they're walking now. She was the Virginia State graduate who broke the color barrier in opera. She was the Virginia State graduate who became an internationally known operatic soprano, and she was the diva of Indiana University. I thought I knew Camilla Williams. But one thing that became clear was that when she was born not just into a family, but into a community. I discovered that when she began her studies at Virginia State College, it was actually Virginia State College for Negroes when she arrived in 1937, she was embraced by another community. In 1877, a sociologist named Ferdinand Tönnies published a book titled Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft. The words in the title were terms for two kinds of society that he thought were ideal. Gesellschaft was the kind of society in which an individual is just that, an individual. In this society, the relationships are impersonal and transitory. The opposite of that was Gemeinschaft, a society in which inhabitants have long-lasting ties. This is the kind of society in both Danville and at Virginia State that nurtured, supported, encouraged, and continuously stood by Camilla Williams. Camilla Williams was born into a musical family, as you heard, especially on her mother's side. Her maternal grandfather was a self-taught musician and church choir director. Her maternal grandmother was a contralto. Some of her earliest musical experiences were in Calvary Baptist Church, and I'm pleased that the minister is here today. She studied piano with the church organist, Jemima Flippin. She started singing at age 5, and at age 10 she sang the aria, Come Unto Him from Handel's Messiah. After which the minister, Reverend Boyd, said, today we have heard a voice that will be heard around the world. It's a prophecy. She began voice lessons with a Mr. Raymond Aubrey, a Welshman who had moved to Danville to teach at the college. And he had no qualms about teaching black students. So arrangements were made for him to teach at someone's house. This was the first time that Williams came into contact with the aria that would define her, Un bel dì from Madama Butterfly. He assigned it to her. She didn't learn it. Instead, she learned 2 Mozart arias. But he introduced it to her. Encouragement for Ms. Williams' vocal development came from whites as well as blacks in Danville. One example of this was Mrs. May Crumpler, a white musician in Danville, and one of Mr. Aubrey's leading altos. And she took her around to the city's white churches to sing. So Mrs. Crumpler is also an example of the kinds of connections that benefited Miss Williams throughout her life. Mrs. Crumpler had 2 daughters, one of whom married Mr. Fred Nolting, who became the U.S. ambassador to Saigon, and who arranged for Miss Williams to perform in Saigon when she toured the Far East in 1962, so that Danville connection is still there. And she performed there under the auspices of the U.S. State Department. As a high school student, Williams was frequently called on to sing, causing someone to tell her mother, Mrs. Williams, if you don't let that girl rest, she's going to die of programmatis or whatever you pronounce that, okay? You've got to let her rest. She succeeded in academics and graduated from John Mercer Langston High School, and I have to say that's a connection, too, with Virginia State. John Mercer Langston was the first president of Virginia State. But she graduated as valedictorian, and she recalled that at that point in her life, her father taught her a lesson in humility that she didn't soon forget. He gave her the task of taking a hoe from home to him at work. Her mother wrapped the hoe up, and she was, I'm a soloist. I'm a valedictorian. I'm not supposed to see this walking the streets of Danville carrying this tool. He didn't need it. He just wanted to remind her that you're no different from anybody else. He wanted her to be seen walking the streets of Danville carrying this hoe, just to keep her humble. And she appreciated that for the rest. It was a valuable lesson. Her dream of attending the Boston Conservatory was thwarted by a lack of funds. Her two sisters attended Hampton Institute, and where they sang in the choir under the leadership of R. Nathaniel Dett, a great African-American musician born in Canada, but taught at various, what we now call HBCUs, but became the first black music director at Hampton in 1913 and took the choir to international fame. But she and her brother Cornelius attended Virginia State College for Negroes. Her parents knew a woman named Mrs. Blondala Broadnax Cowan, maybe some of you know the name, whose sister Moretta Broadnax had attended Virginia State and who still had connections there. Another woman, Asdelia Boyd, and I think I passed by her house today on the tour, who had accompanied her at the piano when she was just a child, was president of the Virginia State Alumni Association. So through these women, Camilla Williams was able to begin her college education. She was entering a new community. It didn't take long for Camilla Williams to be noticed. There was Freshman Talent Night. She signed up for it. They asked, "What are you singing?" And she said, "City Called Heaven." Everybody else was singing popular music. They weren't quite sure where to put her on the program, so they just put her at the end, and that was a good thing. There was thunderous applause, and she won the prize. And not only the prize, but she won the nickname, City Called Heaven. What a nickname, okay? That this had been a favorite, this spiritual had been a favorite of hers since it had been given to her by Mrs. Cohen when she was just 9 years old. The nurturing climate historically associated with what we now call HBCUs was truly evident in the case of Miss Williams. The faculty and administration rallied around her, with one slight exception, and I'll explain that. This is, at first was called the main building. Everything was in this building. Administrative offices, classroom, the students lived in this building. In 1927, the name was changed to Virginia Hall. But there were problems with the building, and so around 1937, the building was demolished in the current Virginia Hall. But that would have been the building that probably was still there when she arrived on campus. But these are some of her teachers. Janella Frazier Jackson, who had been at Virginia State since 1917. She was hired as the first full-time piano teacher, and I'm proud to say I was able to study with her right before she retired. She was my first piano teacher. In 1923, she wrote the music of the school's alma mater. So Mrs. Jackson taught her piano, but she did much more than that. She took an interest in her, personal interest. She encouraged her spirituality. She introduced her to a daily devotional called the Daily Word, and she actually turned to the Daily Word right before she went on the stage for her debut with Madame Butterfly to give a little bit extra strength. Mrs. Jackson's husband was the famed historian Luther P. Jackson, and she said that Dr. Jackson would give her dimes every time she sang for him, and she said she collected those dimes, and that's what she used to pay her membership fee for Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. Okay, I don't know what it cost them, but she collected these dimes. But he said that, you know, Camilla, you are a democratic enterprise. So many people were working to support her. You're a democratic enterprise. Because of all the support that she received, so that's why he got that name. Harold, next slide. Miss Felicia D. Anderson, who wrote the words of the alma mater, looked at her and said, "Camilla, you have nothing but talent and God." Well, that's a lot. That's a lot. And I have to say, Miss Anderson is, the auditorium on the campus is partly named for her. It's the Anderson Turner Auditorium. Virginia native Undine Smith Moore, who began teaching at Virginia State in 1927, she retired in 1972, taught her ear training and harmony, and this was an enduring relationship. Moore wrote Watch and Pray for Camilla Williams. And Moore was one of the people who Camilla Williams said she would call each year on her birthday, and where she had certain people she would call on their birthdays and sing happy birthday to. Ms. Williams was among a group of alumni who were not too pleased with some situations surrounding Dr. Moore's retirement. Camilla Williams, Billy Taylor, Phil Medley. Phil Medley wrote Twist and Shout. He was a graduate of Virginia State. And some other people got together and planned a huge retirement celebration for Undine Moore in New York, luncheon at the New York University Club, a concert at Town Hall, and she was part of that. She continued to support the name of Undine Moore in 1993. I think that was the last time Camilla Williams sang at Virginia State. Sunday, February 14th, 1993, there was a performance held to raise money to start the Undine Moore Scholarship Fund. And she sang two spirituals. I remember being there, and after she sang, she kind of looked at the audience and said, "That wasn't bad for an old girl, was it?" So, her voice teacher was Cleota Collins, and Williams reveled in her tales of travel. Cleota Collins told her she wanted a more exotic name, something she thought would be better for the stage. But when she went to Europe, and somebody called this new name that she had made up, called for this person, and she didn't recognize it. She missed her chance at the audition because she didn't recognize the name she missed. So anyway, she said, "Don't do that." So all these people supported her. Now, there was one exception, and that was J. Harold Montag, who was the choir director. He was not quite as encouraging as some of the other teachers. He featured her regularly as a soloist, as you heard Billy Taylor say, but he didn't like the fact that she got more attention than the choir. When the choir performed in Philadelphia, she sang, maybe I should just give you a cue so you can just say "City Called Heaven" every time I give you the cue. Okay. But she sang "City Called Heaven." Montag didn't even wait for the applause to subside before he had the choir to start the next piece. It's like, that's enough. After the concert, the choir was boarding the bus, and a woman came up to her and told her that, "I noticed what he did, and that's not right, and next time you come to Philadelphia, be sure you come to see me. I want to take you to Curtis Institute and let one of the teachers there hear you." That woman was Mrs. Raymond Pace Alexander, who happened to have been the first woman graduate of the University of Pennsylvania Law School. Camilla Williams was inspired to follow her musical pursuits by two famed African-American singers. One was Todd Duncan, the baritone who was the first Porgy in Porgy and Bess, and he was teaching at Howard University when Virginia State's choir went there to perform. And he complimented Williams, and that was a compliment she held dearly. While Williams was a student at Virginia State, Aunt Marian Anderson sang at the Lincoln Memorial. So of course she was a role model. Williams stated, "Marian Anderson sang beautifully, with such dignity, calm, and outstanding talent, and she was black. My own determination was renewed." In April 1941, Williams traveled to Baltimore to compete in the citywide Young People's Intercollegiate Vocal, Instrumental, and Oratorical Contest. There were judges for the contest, but the winner was determined by applause. Despite the fact that her performance of an aria and, that's your cue, "City Called Heaven," despite the fact that they received a great amount of applause, the judge awarded the prize to a William Brown, a freshman from Morgan State. The judges recommend that she choose selections that were easier than what she had sung, or else you'll just ruin your voice. Okay, what did they know? I wish I could, the article that I found wasn't clear enough to use, but the title of the article about that event was "Virginia State Soloist Weeps When She Loses Contest." Both Cleota Collins, her teacher, and J. Harold Montag, he stood up for that time, went to the judges and expressed their total displeasure about the outcome. She faced another disappointment in 1941 when she failed the required senior examination. She said she had just been performing so much. They had her out performing, and she didn't have time to study, so she failed the exam. And Montag didn't really seem concerned. But word got to the school's president, Dr. Foster, the person he mentioned. I have to say something, too. At that time, if you did not pass your senior examination, you had to repeat the entire senior year. But Dr. Foster, I think, knew about the problems with Montag, and he made the unprecedented decision to let her retake the test. And she took it and passed, and was named Outstanding Graduate of 1941. During the summer of 1942, she returned to Philadelphia. She remembered the offer that Mrs. Alexander made to her, and Mrs. Alexander took her to the Curtis Institute, where one of the teachers confirmed that she had a remarkable voice and made arrangements to, for her to study. Mrs. Alexander informed Camilla Williams that Marian Anderson had just established the Marian Anderson Award. It would not be awarded until fall 1943, but you need to prepare now to audition for this. So Camilla Williams returned to Danville, began teaching 3rd grade. In the summer of 1943, because of a request of 2 graduates of Virginia State who lived in Philadelphia, she was invited to travel with the Virginia State Choir. She's no longer a student, but she traveled with the choir to Philadelphia. And then they performed a concert for the alumni chapter. One of the women worked for Madame Marian Kelly Freschel, an Hungarian-born teacher. Freschel had heard Marian Anderson, and she wanted a black student. She just wanted to work with that kind of voice. Impressed with Williams, Freschel told her that she must study with her for 3 years before she could make her debut. 3 years. Where am I going to stay? How am I going to do this? She had no problem leaving Danville. Of course, there were always detractors. People say, no, you don't need to go. But most of the people supported her, especially her principal, Mr. Edward Gibson, who was a musician. I see someone smiling, you know the name, but he was a musician. I think he was an organist. And he told her, Camilla, if you don't go, dig your grave, bury yourself, cover yourself, and forget it. So he was very supportive. There were detractors, but for the most part, her community and her alma mater supported her. Tassie P. Whiting, you heard her mention her. She was Dean of Women and also taught English. And we have a residence hall on campus named for her. Began the Camilla Williams Fund. You heard that mentioned. Contributors to the fund included Anna Laura Lindsay. Anna Laura Lindsay was at Virginia State from 1899 until, I think, the 1940s, and she really started the music department. The son of Williams' mother's employer sent her $25 a month, and she later found out that he was a millionaire. That fall, Williams auditioned for the Marian Anderson Award, and she and William Brown, the same young man she had lost to in Baltimore 2 years earlier, tied for first place. And this is from the Afro-American, 1943. This is Mrs. Madame Freschel with Marian Anderson. I'm sorry, that was just from a newspaper, so it's not very clear. The next year, she was the sole winner of the Marian Anderson Award, and I believe that I've heard that of the winners, she was the one who always maintained contact with Marian Anderson. In that same year, she also won the Philadelphia Orchestra Youth Concert Competition. Her time in Philadelphia wasn't easy, and I don't have time to go into all of this, but she received financial support from many different sources. She worked as an usher at a theater, but what seemed to have been a generous offer from a couple in Philadelphia to live with them wasn't as generous as she thought at first. They expected her to do some housework and take care of their 2 children. Plus, they started to say, okay, well, you need to buy savings bonds and put our name on it, and it was not always a good scene, okay? She somehow felt obligated to them, so she didn't leave as soon as she should have, but it was not easy. Later on, long after she left, they even tried to say, we need to manage your career. She didn't go along with that. But the ties to and support from Virginia State were unceasing. If anything, they became increasingly stronger through the years. She met William and Gladys Hall through President Foster. Mr. Hall was involved in a foundation that assisted with scholarships. The Halls had a daughter named Marietta. You heard her mention Marietta Cephas. Marietta married Joe Cephas, and Joe Cephas was the treasurer of the Camilla Williams Fund. It was Joe Cephas who took her to Columbia Artists, and that's how she was assigned to one of their managers, Arthur Judson, in 1945. I'm sorry, I was a little ahead of myself. Her Danville support system was also still at work. Her father's employer, Mrs. Patterson, was friends with a Mrs. Gilmore, the niece of Lady Astor, and I saw that house today. Mrs. Gilmore arranged for Williams to perform a concert and for one member of the audience to be Geraldine Farrar. Geraldine Farrar was like one of the most famous sopranos to sing the role of Madama Butterfly. Following that performance, Farrar wrote to Arthur Judson about Williams, expressing her, quote, hope that under careful management and encouragement, the rich promise that she shows will mature to even higher artistic endeavors. Judson didn't believe the letter came from her. He called to check to say, did you write this letter? After he verified that, he contacted Laszlo Haslus at the New York City Opera to arrange an audition. The audition resulted in Haslus wanting Williams to sing the role of Cho-Cho-san in Madama Butterfly, the same role that Farrar had sung. But it's a little tricky putting on an opera about Japan during World War II. So we'll wait until the war is over. I don't want to do that. So, but after the war was over, he called for her, and for her to come to New York to prepare. And she had coaching. She had to find a makeup artist. She wanted to make sure she really looked Japanese. And she said at the debut there were some Japanese people in the audience who thought she was Japanese. But she got that financial support from Tassi P. Whiting and other faculty, Virginia State Faculty Administration. Haslus received threats from people who did not want Williams in that role. She was auditioning time and time again to keep the role. During a PBS interview in 2000, she learned about something she had never heard. The Haslus had received a letter from the tenor who sang Pinkerton. Pinkerton is the character who marries Cho-Cho-san. And he wrote, what happened, the tenor wrote a letter to Mayor LaGuardia protesting Williams having that role. Some people wrote to Haslus and threatened to shoot him. There were some serious threats. She knew about some of them, but she did not know about the letter to the mayor until the year 2000. So, she debuted as Cho-Cho-san on May 15, 1946, and this child of Danville was breaking the color barrier by being the first African American to have a contract with a major American opera company. Busloads of Danville residents and Virginia State alumni from Philadelphia went to the performance. The review in the New York Times included the statement that, quote, Camilla Williams, an unusually gifted soprano, made an instant and pronounced success in the title role. And it continued with, Miss Williams disclosed innate histrionic ability that enabled her to portray Puccini's heroine with a vividness and subtlety unmatched by any other artist who has essayed the part here in recent years. She ran the entire emotional gamut from ecstatic joy to tragic despair with extraordinary conviction and effectiveness, yet always with refinement of feeling and just the needed amount of restraint. After her Butterfly triumph, Williams' career flourished, but she suffered a personal loss when her father died in 1947. This is from a later period. I think it might be from the 50s, but I just wanted you to see Geraldine Farrar, and Camilla Williams together, the two famous Cho-Cho-sans. Okay. So 1947, she suffers this loss of her father. The following year, she became the first Aida on the New York City Opera stage, and the famous critic Olin Downs wrote, the most moving singer on the stage was Camilla Williams. She sang with intense feeling, with significant diction, a high artistic achievement. Always she sang as a musician and as an artist. But no mention was made of her in the Life magazine review, as if she didn't exist. But the following year, Life magazine listed her as one of the singers of the year. So they ignored her one year and brought attention to her the next year. As you heard her say, the search for an accompanist whose artistry matched hers ended when she met Boris Brzala, who, though he only accompanied her for 8 years, remained a friend for life. Williams said, he guided me through the sophisticated world of classical music, and I guided him through the tough terrain of racist America. When the two traveled by train through the South, he refused to sit in the whites-only section. He also questioned, why she could attend receptions held in rooms that she could not enter on a daily basis just to eat a simple meal. The decade began with her marriage to Charles Beavers. Let me see. I found this. This was in the Chicago Defender. Wedding bells ring, so her marriage was national attention. The decade began with her marriage to Charles Beavers, another Danville native and 1941 graduate of Virginia State. He pursued further study at Purdue University and earned a law degree from the New York Law School in 1949. In 1951, she and her husband took new paths. He was admitted to the New York State Bar and began practicing law. She began making recordings, with the first being that of Porgy and Bess. She loved the music of Porgy and Bess, but didn't really like the setting, and she never quite understood, because the setting she thought just perpetuated stereotypes of African Americans, and she didn't know why Porgy and Bess couldn't be staged with high-rise apartment buildings. So, the 1950s also found her traveling to Europe on the recommendation of tenor Roland Hayes. In Europe, she found, as did other black Americans, no prejudice. During this decade, she traveled to London, Vienna, and Belgium. In 1958, the U.S. State Department sent her to 14 African countries. In 1959, she returned to Virginia State to perform a concert. And this is, my parents attended this concert. I had this program at home, and just so you can see some of the, she didn't sing City Called Heaven, but, she autographed it, so I value that. In that same year, she traveled to Israel and also back to Danville, where in March she sang for an audience of over 2,000, both black and white, in the city auditorium. It was reported that although both races were admitted to the auditorium, they occupied different sections of the hall. However, this was thought to be an improvement over the separate show system, which was practiced in most southern cities. It was at this time that Williams was presented with the keys to the city, the first time an African American had been presented with the keys. And she also was presented an engraved silver bowl by the Music Study Club. According to a feature article in the November 10, 1962 issue of the New York Amsterdam News, Charles Beavers kept a large world map in the bathroom of their apartment on Riverside Drive in New York, and he used stick pins to keep track of where his wife was. At the time of the article's printing, her favorite gift was said to have been a leopard skin rug given to her in Kenya. She had a goat skin rug from Australia in her bedroom. And it was interesting, this portrait is here. She's a portrait painted by an Israeli artist. Porcelains from Germany, carved ivory from Africa, and art objects from the Orient. So her home was like a museum, all these beautiful things she had collected. Yeah. In the 1960s, Williams contributed to the civil rights movement. She made no speeches and could not be considered a real activist. After having visited, she saw no reason to wear an afro or African garb. Much in the manner of Marian Anderson, Williams stood for her people's cause through her talent and by her regal demeanor. She often sang gratis for the NAACP, including for an event held in 1962 in New York to honor Roy Wilkins' 30 years of service. The State Department sent her off again in 1962, this time to places such as Australia, New Zealand, Korea, and Japan. July 1963, she returned to Danville, and I think most people in the room know the significance of 1963 in Danville. The demonstrators, the demonstrators who had been arrested. So she came to perform a concert to raise money for bail, this was noted in the New York Amsterdam News on July 6. Said the current struggle between Negroes and whites took a temporary backseat in Danville, Virginia last week when soprano Camilla Williams was returned to her native home to give a concert. Both whites and Negroes almost filled the 1,100-seat Loyal Baptist Church to hear her in Classics and Spirituals. On that same date and in that same newspaper, it was reported that attorney Charles Beavers, her husband, appeared in federal court with a battery of lawyers to help Negroes arrested there in demonstrations. She appeared on the national civil rights stage in August 1963, and we just had that big 50th anniversary, when she sang at the March on Washington. Reports of her involvement in the event varied, some making it seem as though her performance was impromptu. As she explained, Roy Wilkins sent her a telegram requesting that she and her husband arrive in D.C. the day before, explaining that she was on the program to sing "Oh, What a Beautiful City." Marian Anderson, and you can see Marian Anderson listed as singing the national anthem, she was stuck in traffic. And Camilla Williams said she heard this announcement made that she was going to sing. She said, I was stunned when I heard my name announced 3 times. I ran up those many steps as quickly as I could and arrived at the microphone breathless. I took a deep breath, prayed quickly, and sang it to the best of my ability. And I found out, I think if you brush your teeth in the morning, it's going to be on YouTube by 4 o'clock. If you go to YouTube and just type in Camilla Williams at MOW, and you can hear her sing the national anthem. It's not a videotape, but there is an audio tape there. In 1964, she sang the Battle Hymn of the Republic when the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was honored in New York for having won the Nobel Peace Prize. She was among several personalities to come together for the NAACP Freedom Spectacular. Did anyone know about this? I had not heard about this. This was in recognition of the 10th anniversary of the Brown versus Board of Education decision. And I'm still trying to get some more information, but this was also to raise bail funds for some jail demonstrators and to honor Thurgood Marshall. The national co-chairs for the event were Lena Horne and Steve Allen in Hollywood, Sammy Davis Jr. and Ed Sullivan in New York. And when I looked at the list, there were people I had no clue had really been involved in anything like this. But among the celebrities were Harry Belafonte, Tony Bennett, Richard Burton, Nat King Cole, Ossie Davis, Ruby Dee, Sidney Poitier, Edward G. Robinson, Elizabeth Taylor, Langston Hughes, and Mahalia Jackson. More than 10,000 people attended this event at Madison Square Garden. Viewers watched the event as it was shown in 47 other cities across the country. And Thurgood Marshall was presented with the NAACP Freedom Bell by Roy Wilkins. Arthur Judson feared that Williams would start speaking out about racial issues. You know what they did to Paul Robeson, you know. So he was afraid that she would get vocal, and so he started booking her in small places. No big concerts in case she decided to say something about race. And so that, of course, affected her income. In October of that year, she's back at Virginia State, this time with Todd Duncan, who had been one of her inspirations. You can see some of the duets that they sang. And her aria from Madame Butterfly. And once again, she didn't sing City Called Heaven. I don't know what was going on. But that was 1964. Her husband, by the end of the decade ended solemnly for her because her husband, who had been a court-appointed lawyer for one of the 3 men convicted of the murder of Malcolm X, and he also worked on behalf of the poor in Harlem. He had just become chief law officer in a law group at the Harlem Assertion of Rights Incorporated, which opened to provide free legal services to Harlem residents who made $3,000 or less. So she lost him in that year. 1970, she turned to teaching, rather reluctantly. She had never planned to teach. She was at first at the Manhattan School of Music, then at Bronx College and at Brooklyn College. In 1975, she received calls to teach at Indiana University. There was a graduate of Virginia State, Michael Gordon, who was at Indiana, and he was one of the people who called to try to get her to come. Undine Moore, who was still, she had retired from Virginia State, but she was still her teacher, and Undine Moore, I know because she taught me piano, she still wanted to kind of tell you what to do. She called her and said, you need to take this position. In 1977, she relocated to Bloomington, Indiana, only to find that prejudice existed in the Midwest as well. She wanted to move into a condominium, and she was told, oh, Camilla, you can't live there. But she met the widow of an ethnomusicologist who was still living there. She said, the apartment below is open. So they let her move in, but she could hear the N-word as she walked to and from. And she said, but she loved the way her heels sounded as they clicked across the concrete. And she just held her head, kept her head up and threw her furs on and went about her way. Eventually, they warmed up to her, but even the little children were, making comments about her. In 1984, she taught her first Chinese student. The student's uncle was head of the conservatory in Beijing, and she was invited to teach there for 6 weeks. She retired from teaching in 1997, though she continued to teach a few students until 2001. And I always tell people, Camilla Williams never earned a graduate degree. Everybody is degree crazy now. But she taught in Indiana. Well, all of her stage experience. You can't substitute anything for that. She received many awards and recognitions during her life. She was one of 4 alumni to be given certificates of merit by Virginia State College in 1957. That was also the year in which Virginia State gave an honorary doctorate degree to Marian Anderson. In 1972, she was one of a group of people, including Arthur Ashe and Joseph Cotton, to receive a Distinguished Virginian Award from Governor Linwood Holton. The event was marred by comments made by then Senator L. Douglas Wilder in reaction to Williams having just on an impromptu basis saying, "Carry me back to old Virginia." I think you remember how Wilder was about that song. And he was quoted as having stated that the performance was, quote, completely uncalled for, and that she was not brought to Richmond, quote, to be an Aunt Jemima. It's the only negative thing I've ever read regarding her. Wilder said that he would not accept the artistic excuse for her actions, continuing with the statement that, quote, no art is acceptable that is degrading to a people. Ms. Williams' agent responded to the accusation by saying that the performance of the song was not related to politics. She was simply singing the state song, and she did not dignify his comments with any kind of response at all. Among the honors granted her by Danville were the naming of a Camilla Williams Park, which I saw for the first time today. It was interesting. I left yesterday after my last class. I had students coming to speak to me, and the last student is from Danville. And I said, I'm going there today. But I was so pleased that, a lot of times young people don't know anything about where they live. And she just went on and on and on, and I was so pleased that, and I've had other students from Danville, so you're doing something. You're doing something right. It's always good to hear that. She was also inducted into the Danville Hall of Fame, as you heard Ms. Burton say. During her career, she sang in the presence of 4 sitting presidents, Truman, Eisenhower, Johnson, and Clinton. She did sing for Kennedy, but he wasn't president at the time. In February 2010, she was recognized by Bloomington's mayor and Indiana University School of Music. She also received a letter from President Barack Obama. The proclamation from the city of Bloomington ended with the statement that she always heeded, quote, early parental advice that if you can't make friends, at least don't make enemies. In March 2006, the newly formed Woman-to-Woman Committee at Virginia State University held an event to recognize women for whom buildings and other spaces on campus were named. At the time, only 2 of those women were still living. Ms. Williams was one. Arrangements were made for her to attend the event by telephone. And she was so moved with the program that she asked to, and the performances by 2 of our voice instructors, that she asked to say a few words. We really hadn't set it up so that we could hear her, but she was just so ecstatic about the whole thing. The next year, she was honored by her home state, as she was named among notable Virginia women by the Virginia Library of Virginia. She attended the event accompanied by her lifelong friend and accompanist, Boris Bazala. Bazala's 2 sons were concerned about him after his wife died, and they went to her and said, we know you have an extra bedroom. Can our father live with you? And she thought about it and decided, why not? They were close friends. She said it just made her feel better to hear him in the next room. She could cook. He could play the piano. She could sing. And their special friendship was the topic of a PBS program titled The Mystery of Love that first aired in 2006. This is also on the internet. Don't do anything if you don't want it on the internet. They shared their music, memories, and companionship until his death at the age of 100 in February 2011. He died February 2011. She died February 2012. The death of Miss Camilla Williams was noted by the press internationally. I wanted you to see coverage in the Petersburg Progress Index. This is a photograph that was taken when she was when she had performed at Virginia State. She was remembered at Virginia State with a memorial service on February 15th, in which the VSU Concert Choir participated as a tribute to the years that she sang with the choir. The service also included performances of Un Bel Dì from Madonna Butterfly and Watch and Pray that had been written for her. There were tributes given by Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. We made sure some of the student members were there. The alumni office and the president of the institution. Many more people should have attended. They should have attended. Which makes me ask, are we losing or have we lost a sense of community? At one time, that auditorium would have been filled. With all of her triumphs, it seems too strange to read that Camilla Williams cried often, as she did when she lost that competition in 1941. Though she made history with her 1946 performance at the New York City Opera, the politics between that company and the Metropolitan kept her from ever singing at the Met. She was managed by a Columbia artist, but was not always handled well, something that Marian Anderson told had happened to her also. Some people have tried to diminish her New York City Opera debut because they think it might negate Marian Anderson having been the first African American to perform at the Met. Yes, there were people who took advantage of her. Yes, she suffered the indignities of racism, even when she tried to find suitable housing in Indiana. Yes, she did not reap large financial rewards from performing, but she said, quote, "It is hard to keep from weeping with joy when I consider all of my blessings," unquote. She said that the words of her father's favorite spiritual best described how she felt. But the words of that spiritual were, "How I got over, my soul looks back and wonders how I got over." But she didn't just get over. I wanted to put the words of City Called Heaven. And it's interesting that someone would give this to a 9-year-old. Now, would a 9-year-old understand it? But it's fitting because in spirituals, the word heaven could mean freedom. You know, it just meant a better place. And so she was constantly seeking this better place, a place that she reached. But when I think about that, and I think about a poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar that has a, sometimes the sun unkindly hot, my garden makes a desert spot. Sometimes a blight upon the tree takes all my fruit away from me. And talks about the pain, the rebellious throes of pain and so forth. And so I sing, and all is well. That was the author of a book about black women singers used "And So I Sing" as the title because of all the obstacles they had to face. I thought about that poem. But I turned to Paul Laurence Dunbar, and I found another poem that I think is more fitting for Camilla Williams, and because of the sense of community and all that people did for her. And it's just this 4-line poem. "Because you love me, I have much achieved. Had you despised me, then I must have failed. But since I knew you trusted and believed, I could not disappoint you, and so prevailed." This is Miss Camilla Williams. Thank you, Danville, for creating this wonderful person. Thank you.
What I remember about Virginia State are the people that were my teachers, President Gandy, Tassa P. Whiting, she was head of the Camilla Williams Fund, Miss Annie Lara, Lindsay, and Marietta Cephas, Dr. Cephas, Dr. Foster, he was the president after Gandy. He was a wonderful person. I've been singing since I was 5 years old. My grandfather was a self-trained choral man, and everybody in my family sang. We were very poor people, but we had the gift of song. That's right. And my greatest desire was to sing behind a symphony orchestra. And let me tell you, when you sing as a soloist with the symphony orchestra, you sing in front, not in the back. And when I was in high school, my brother and I and all the young people, Danville, Virginia, was a singing town. And we would get together at recess and sing. We pretended we were singing opera. I am going home. I would sing, I'm going home. And then the bass would sing, come here. And then we pretended we were doing opera, not knowing that one day I would really make my debut in opera. And I wanted you to meet my accompanist because I went to Hampton. It was Hampton Institute then, now it's Hampton University. And Mr. Forster, President Forster, that was after I was graduated, said, you need a different accompanist. You must not have that accompanist. He sent the word to President Forster. And Forster sent the word to Arthur Judson, Columbia Artist Management, who became my manager. You need another accompanist. And I had 50 concerts coming up. I had just made my debut in Madame Butterfly. I'm ahead of my story. But that's how Dr. Bozzella became my accompanist through Virginia State.
I met her 2 months after we arrived in America. Came on Halloween with my family, and I didn't know what am I going to do in America with my music. The telephone rings, and my wife answered, can Dr. Bozzella go to Philadelphia and meet one of our artists, and if she approves of him, he can make the tour. There are 50 concerts. So I go to Philadelphia, go out of the train, and I'm looking around, and this charming lady comes to me, you're Dr. Bozzella? I said, yes, yeah. Yeah, she recognized me first because I came with my old European hat, which was out of style in America, and my winter coat, which was also out of style. She brought me to the house that she was living. We go into the living room. She opens the score. I strike one chord on the piano, and a charming voice, which I wouldn't believe comes from an American Negro, said, "E Susanna non viene?" I said, is it possible that here in this country I'm going to hear a voice that reminds me of the prima donna of the Berlin Opera? 2 days later, or 3 days later, I get from Columbia Artists the itinerary for January, February, and March. So I start the tour with Miss Williams.